I have a friend who has an 18-year-old child, technically an adult, who does not have their driver's license. I'm going to share my opinion on this, plus more. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Intentional Father Podcast, where us fathers parent our children, not by accident, but with intent. I'm your host, Aaron Stroman. This episode is all about driving. What is the role of a parent to equip their children to drive, and how do you do it? First, let's talk about some of the big picture philosophy before we get into the nitty-gritty techniques. Should we prepare, even encourage our children to get driver's license? I say yes, and here's why. I think the process of learning how to drive and obtaining a driver's license and operating a vehicle is a huge opportunity for growth and responsibility. As parents, we want to prepare our children for adulthood. We want to be raising children who turn into adults, who are independent, self-sufficient, and the driver's license, the ability to drive a vehicle, is a critical part of that. It's interesting, this new wave of, and I think it's generational, but this new wave of children and young adults who don't have a desire to get their driver's license. My friends and I, we were all excited. I mean, the day I turned 16, I was at the DMV, got the driver's license. My mom dropped me back off at my house where I had my old truck, and I drove it to school. That's how it used to be. Nowadays, kids are graduating high school without their driver's license or going through college without a driver's license. And I get some of it's generational, some of it's technology. Things like Uber and Lyft make it easy for transportation, public transportation. You don't always have to have a vehicle. I get it, but I still think there's a value in having a driver's license. I do. And I think parents should encourage their kids and teach them how to drive and walk with them how to get their driver's license. Are there other dynamics that could come into play of why a parent might have a fear of their kid getting a driver's license? Yes, typically those fears are irrational or they're very, very unique situations. But I just think, I'm just going to say it, I think you're robbing your child of an opportunity to grow up if you're not expecting them to get their driver's license. So how do you do this? Here's how I did it. And let me say with this episode, this is not legal advice. In fact, I'm going to give some self-incriminating information because I had my kids sitting in my lap, working the steering wheel in the neighborhood long before their feet could reach the pedals. They were pretty young, but I started that idea of getting comfortable behind the wheel, started that experience when they were young. And I was doing it in my neighborhood, never got in trouble, never I never put my kids or my family at risk. Okay, so, but I will admit that action was illegal, technically. I was doing it in the neighborhood. My neighbor's a law enforcement officer. He didn't pull me over, have a problem with it. But the point is I started young. Before they could even reach. Once they were tall enough to reach the pedals, we would go into abandoned parking lots and just work on gas and brake, start and go. Again, working with steering wheel. Eventually, I was running some parallel parking drills, in my street, in the driveway, in those abandoned parking lots. Church parking lot, that was another good one. I had permission to do some driving lessons in. And so I got my kids started before they needed to get started. And I always had an expectation that when you turn of age, you're going to get your permit, you're going to do your hours, and you're going to get your driver's license. And that was just expected, and I think that's healthy expectations. I did get started a little early, but when the kids were that age where they could get their permit, they were ready. And we went out and, they took the written test. I helped them study. They passed a written test and they go get their little permit. Then we start practicing. And then I did sign them up for driver's ed. Now, I know state to state, the laws and rules and timelines are all different. In my state, they could get a permit, but then after a year, there's a next level they can go to, a less restricted permit if they do a certain amount of driving and if they take driver's ed. So I did the driver's ed, and they crushed the driver's ed. Their driver's instructors were really impressed with them because they just did a good job because they had been driving. And I think that's a part of it. Get your kids comfortable and get them used to driving so they can take those steps with confidence. The worst thing and the most dangerous thing is a kid getting a driver's license who's not ready to drive. They don't have the experience of being behind the wheel, getting in traffic, knowing the rules of the road. That's super dangerous. But dads, we got to be raising our children to drive. Here's another factor. I still had to somewhat insist, and the different kids look different, but I insist that they get their driving hours. One of my children loves to drive. The other one does not, so it has to be disciplined, forced a little more. But I think that's a really good process for children to go through. And you get to teach them about the law, obeying speed limits, what to do when they're pulled over, respecting law enforcement, respecting the authority. This is all good. Now, another question that comes up when we're talking about driving, right? We have children going to start driving. The question comes up, well, who pays for what? There's a cost of the vehicle. There's a cost of maintaining the vehicle. There's a cost of car insurance, and there's cost of fuel. So how do we manage that? And with this one, I'll say I'm a little less prescriptive. I would do it on a case-by-case basis. Regardless of your income level, I do think the child should have some skin in the game. Don't provide the car and maintenance and insurance and fuel for free. I would almost never do that. There's very few exceptions I would do that. Like if they're working a job that they're not getting paid for. What is that? That might be volunteerism, and it might be if, by the time they're 16, they are a high-level athlete that really is going to get a full ride scholarship. Then maybe if they're treating their sport or some sort of thing that leads to scholarship, where there will be some sort of financial return, maybe in those situations. Otherwise, have your kids put some skin in the game. Have them help pay for the vehicle, or have them help pay for part of the insurance, maybe all the insurance. If you can't afford your kids to drive, then put it all on them. Still let them get their driver's license, but if they don't have a car, that's okay. They can drive yours when you're all together. But I do think it's good and healthy for kids to have some skin in the game. How we're doing it, I'm having my kids put down a little bit of money for the vehicle. I'm covering insurance. Their mom and I covering insurance. They pay for their own fuel. So it's like how much you want to drive, how much, that's all up to them. But they're also driving to and from work, different jobs. So they're using their car to earn money, and they're using responsibility. And that's actually opened up a really good conversation just about economics and politics. I remember the first time my daughter called me and really excited because she filled up her tank. And I don't know where she was at, but she was expecting to pay $30 and she only had to pay $20, and she looked and the price of gas was way down low. And she didn't realize it could fluctuate that much. And so we started talking about the economy and politics, and like who you vote for, and the administration controls a lot of the price of oil, which means gasoline. And there's typically one party when they're in office that really lowers the gas price, and people like myself appreciate that. So that was a great conversation with my daughter. We've also just talked about consequences, being safe. Little mistakes cost you big money. I'm covering my kids' insurance right now. If they get in a wreck, it's on them. And, fair enough, like whatever. That's a part of growing up. So with all that, you got to figure out what works best for you as far as like what you can afford, what you want, what you choose to afford, what you want your kids to pay for, what you want to pay for. but let them have some skin in the game. Okay, here's the deal. I started off this episode by talking about a friend who has a child who's 18 who doesn't have their driver's license. I am a little critical of this, but hear me out. I don't think that's a moral problem. It's not a right or wrong thing. I don't think that's the best way to parent a child. So if you do that, I'm not saying you're a horrible person or a bad parent. I do think there's opportunity to up your parenting game and equip your kid for life in a more proactive way and to have high expectations. Again, I've said this before on the podcast, but children tend to live up to the expectations we have of them. So it's okay to have high expectations of your child. And here's my final disclaimer. My children are in the license/permit stage of life. So I only have 2 kids. So I don't have like reps and decades of experience here. I'm currently living this out as this podcast is being recorded and edited and all that stuff. So maybe I'll disagree with myself 5 years down the road. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It's hard to say. But I do think, I think it's a good parenting move to equip your kids to get their driver's license. And I'll say this too. Life becomes a lot easier when your children can drive. It becomes more convenient. They become more independent. There is kind of this sad part of it. I remember the first time my daughter was able to drive herself and my son to school in the morning. I got kind of sad because I was like, oh, they don't need me. They're independent. But it's a selfish sadness. It's kind of reminiscing of the past. It's not what's best for the children. And now I'm grateful. So I would just encourage you, take those things into consideration. Fathers, teach your kids how to live, how to be successful adults, how to mature, how to have responsibility, and driving is a great way to do that. I'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.